So, dear doctors, welcome you for this discussion session of the recall questions of the recently concluded INICET examination. So, this will be a forensic medicine recall questions of INICET November 2021. Well, before I start with the session, I want to put out a disclaimer stating that obviously these are recall questions, so we have tried our best to keep the overall gist of the question as much as possible as the original question. But here and there, bit of words, bit of phrases might change, but the meaning of the entire question or what exactly they want us to answer will be kept as sacrosanct. Okay. Well, with that, forensic medicine did have, it's happy to know that forensic medicine did have good number of representation in the present INICET. Somewhere about 10 to 11 questions were asked. That's a good one. And second happier thing is, once again, all those questions, so you will find the answer for all those questions in the eGurukul notes. So the notes provided in the eGurukul forensic medicine. So I will be taking out as usual the way I discussed. I'll be taking out the screenshot from those notes. So almost all the questions have been directly from the notes that have been provided to you. So success rate still remains high, 100%. Okay. Well, with that, let's move on to the first question in that. Well, the question goes like this. A patient is brought to OPD following a road traffic accident. A lacerated wound of 3 into 1 centimeters, bone deep, was noted over the scalp or the forehead. Some students have said scalp, some students have said forehead. Fine. Which of the following is the correct mechanism of this lacerated wound? Fine. So let's look into some of the key aspects of the question. So it is a lacerated wound. First of all, yes. Second, it is a bone deep lacerated wound. Okay. Third, it is noted over the scalp or the forehead. This should clinch the answer. So this should clinch the answer. So this is noted on that particular site of the body or on that particular part of the body wherein immediately beneath the skin there is a bone. So immediately beneath the skin there is a bone. So here the skin is sandwiched. It is crushed between two hard objects. Okay, one the underlying bone and the other either the weapon or the hard floor of the ground. Okay, road traffic accident, it's a ground. So when the skin is sandwiched between or crushed between two hard objects, it just splits open. It just splits open. So this, what we are talking about here is basically split laceration. It's basically split laceration. So we are talking about split laceration. So split laceration is found on those parts of the body wherein immediately beneath the skin there is a bone. So what happens here? So soft tissue is crushed between the weapon and the bone. The weapon here is nothing but the ground. So the ground and the bone, thereby it splits open. So it is a split laceration, and this is the mechanism. So now let's look into some theoretical parts of this. Okay. So what is split laceration? Again, very clearly I have taken out the screenshot from the notes. Okay. So split laceration. So split laceration are seen when the skin is crushed between two hard objects. Second important point, seen in the areas where immediately beneath the skin there is a bone. So examples, scalp, forehead, knee, shin, these are the ones. And it resembles incised wound. A repeated question. It resembles incised wound. So what is the difference between the split laceration and the incised wound? Well, I'll just take the help of a take note for that. So the difference between split laceration and an incised wound. Well, yeah. So this is a repeated question for us. It's a repeated question for us. The difference between split laceration and an incised wound. So repeatedly asked for us. So as usual, the way I do it, I just always revise the things first. So first of all, margins. The first important criteria will be margins. Since split laceration, the margins are wavy like this. Wavy. What we call as ragged margins or ragging of the margins. In incised wound, they are clean cut. They are clean cut. Second, abrasions and contusions along the margin. abrasions and contusions along the margin. So along this margin, because split laceration in injury is an injury which is caused by a blunt force impact, so along this margin, invariably there will be abrasions and contusions. Whereas incised wound, obviously there will not be. Okay. Next, the contents of the injury. Contents. See, contents of the injury are the ones which make the floor of the injury. So, for example, if this is the split laceration, for example, so the contents of the injury will be the muscle fiber, the nerve fiber, a blood vessel, a tendon. So, these are the contents. So, contents of split laceration, they are crushed. They are crushed. Whereas contents of incised wound, they are clean cut. They are clean cut. And for the very same reason, hemorrhage, hemorrhage in case of split laceration is less, whereas hemorrhage in incised wound is more, because here the vessels are crushed and the vessels here are clean cut. Okay. And in split laceration, remember this very, very important point frequently asked. In split laceration, you will find swallow tails. So what are swallow tails? You can go back to the theory of that again in the notes, but just brief. Swallow tails are the one when the momentum of impact is very fast. So there will be small lacerations perpendicular to the main laceration from the tips of the laceration. So these are called as swallow tails. Swallow tails. So all these are very important points for you regarding split laceration and the difference between split laceration and incised wound. Okay. So let's again go back to, yes. So that's it about split laceration. Then there were also some other options. If you go by, there were definitely some other options. So what are the other options? We will look into stretch laceration, or the different types of lacerations and the mechanisms of causing different types of lacerations. Okay, stretch laceration is caused due to overstretching of the skin. So simple run over by a vehicle. Avulsion laceration frequently asked as a question. See, most common question asked in laceration is split laceration. Second most common, avulsion laceration. Probably these are the only two ones which are asked. Avulsion laceration, run over by a huge force, and the force not only crushing here, it is shearing force. It's a tearing and shearing force. Okay, so this is also called as flaying. Flaying. This is a repeated question. So avulsion laceration is also called as flaying. Repeated question for us. Then tear lacerations, impact against irregular or semi-sharp objects like door handles. Okay. Cut laceration produced by a heavy object which is relatively or moderately sharp like an axe or a hatchet. Okay. So stretch, avulsion, tear and cut, split, of which split and avulsion laceration very important. Some of the photographs. So this is, though it very much looks like an incised wound here, but it is a laceration. Very good photograph which shows swallow tail here. It's a split laceration showing a swallow tail. So very clearly, this looks like an incised wound, but it is definitely a laceration. It's definitely a laceration, split laceration. This is what is known as flaying, flaying or avulsion laceration. So wherein the entire skin, subcutaneous tissue and the muscle, they get avulsed from their underlying bony attachments. Avulsion laceration also referred as flaying. Okay, fine. So this is all about that particular question what we just discussed. Let's move to the next question now. A case of hanging is brought for autopsy. On examination, right eye was open, left eye was closed, and there was salivary dribbling or the stains, salivary stains from the angle of the mouth was noted. The reason for open right eye is due to pressure on which of the following structures? Note down here, let's split the question. So it was a case of hanging, first point. Second, right eye was open, right? Third point, left eye was closed. There was salivary dribbling from the angle of the mouth. Okay, what is the reason for this? So what exactly you call this as? What exactly you call this as? So this is known as, so this phenomenon wherein in a case of hanging, when one of the eye is open and the other eye is closed, so this is eyelids or eye is open. This is referred as leaf faciae sympathicae. Leaf faciae sympathicae, right? Leaf faciae sympathicae. So why is this due to? Leaf faciae sympathicae. Leaf faciae sympathicae is due to the reason wherein when the ligature material or the knot of the ligature material compresses upon the cervical ganglia. So when the ligature material or the knot of the ligature material compresses upon the cervical ganglia ipsilaterally, that is on the same side. So if it is compressed on the right side, so if this, so in this case particularly, so the ligature material has compressed the cervical ganglia on the right side, because of which the right eye remains open with dilatation of pupil, whereas the left eye remains closed. Okay, so right eye is open because of leaf facies sympathetic. It's called as leaf facies sympathetic because of compression of cervical sympathetic chain by the ligature material or the knot of the ligature. Okay, well, let's move to the theoretical part of this. Again, the screenshot has been taken from the notes. So dribbling of saliva from the angle of the mouth is the important feature of antemortem hanging. So some textbook, particularly Anil Agarwal textbook, says that this is the most important sign of antemortem hanging. Dribbling of saliva, it is said as the most important sign of antemortem hanging. Why this happens? Why there is dribbling of saliva? Two reasons. One, stimulation of pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, stimulation of pterygopalatine ganglia. And second, direct compression of the salivary glands. See, whenever there is the ligature material compresses upon the submandibular, mainly submandibular glands, so there is irritation, production of more saliva, dribbling of saliva. Okay, so these are the two mechanisms why there is dribbling of saliva. And dribbling of saliva, this is again a repeated question. Dribbling of saliva is usually seen opposite to the site of knot. Opposite to the site of knot. For example, if the knot is on this side, what happens is, if the knot is on the right side, the head drools down or droops down onto the left side, like this. The knot is here, the head is drooping down. Because the head falls to the opposite side, so the submandibular gland on the left side gets easily compressed by the ligature material. So thereby, it produces more amount of saliva, and because again, just by the gravity, so it is the head is tilted to the left. Just by the gravity, it oozes out from the left angle of the mouth. Okay, opposite to the side of the knot. Whereas leaf facies sympathetic is seen ipsilaterally on the same side of the knot. Leaf facies sympathetic is seen on the same side of the knot. Okay, so leaf facies sympathetic, due to the compression of cervical sympathetic by the ligature material, causes ipsilateral opening of the eyes with dilatation of pupil. Again, a very important finding to say, it is a case of antemortem hanging. Antemortem hanging. Okay. Now, see, there are a few other points here very frequently asked as a question. Oh, just change the color. Okay, fine. See, the pressure required to occlude certain organs. Pressure required to occlude certain structures. Very important. So jugular vein 2 to 3 kgs, 2 to 3 kgs. Carotids, carotid artery 4 to 5 kgs. Then trachea 15 kgs, and vertebral artery 20 kgs. Okay, 20 kgs. So the important question is the first structure to get occluded. So jugular vein is the first structure to get occluded, and vertebral artery is the last structure to get occluded. It's a repeated question for you. It's a repeated question for you. Okay. Now, regarding hanging itself, yeah, I just want to highlight few things regarding hanging. Okay. Yeah. A few important points let's highlight regarding hanging here. So two features which we already discussed. One is dribbling of saliva, and the second would be a leaf facies sympathetic, to say it is an antemortem hanging. The third important point you got to know is AMUSAT sign. AMUSAT sign. It's a repeated question. What is AMUSAT sign? Transverse tear. Transverse tears in the tunica intima of the carotids. Transverse tears in the tunica intima of the carotids. It's a repeated question. It's also a feature of antemortem hanging. Definitely it's a feature of antemortem hanging. Okay. Transverse tears. Then is frequently asked question is hangman's fracture. Yeah, hangman fracture. So two fractures, in fact, they are called as hangman fracture. One, fracture dislocation at the level of C2, C3. Fracture dislocation at the level of C2, C3 is also called as hangman fracture. Plus, so bilateral fractures of either lamina or pedicles, either laminae or the pedicles, okay, either the lamina or pedicles of C2. So bilateral fracture of either the lamina or the pedicles of C2 is also called as hangman fracture. It's also called as hangman fracture. Now fracture dislocation at the level of C6, C7 is called as undertaker fracture. Is called as undertaker fracture, which is basically an artifact. It is basically an artifact. That is, it's a post-mortem fracture, not an ante-mortem fracture. Okay. So these are the important points. Dribbling, you got to note: dribbling of saliva, leaf facius sympathicae, Amusat sign, hangman fracture, and undertaker fracture. Frequently asked questions for us. Okay. Well, let's go into the next question now. A person was brought dead to casualty following an explosion. Multiple abrasions and lacerations were noted on the right side of the chest and abdomen. Injuries were caused by, or what is the mechanism of causation of such injuries? So, following an explosion is the question. So, there are multiple abrasions, there are multiple lacerations noted on some part of the body. So, injuries are caused by, what is the mechanism of this? Okay. See, a blast injury or an explosion injury causes injuries, or a blast or an explosion causes injuries in three ways. Okay, in three different ways. Which are they? So, explosion injuries cause the explosion causes injuries in three different ways. One is primary blast injury, secondary blast injury, and tertiary blast injury. Okay, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary blast injury is due to the blast wave. So blast wave. So from the site of blast, if this is the blast site, so sir, concentric ripples of waves are created from the blast site, which move concentrically from the site of blast. So these blast waves, they are responsible for primary blast injury. Okay. So what are the organs that are involved? Organs which are injured most commonly are the organs filled with air, which contain air. Okay. So the most sensitive for primary blast injury, tympanic membrane. All these are repeated questions for you. Most sensitive for the primary blast injury, tympanic membrane. Now this question particular, just a minute. Yeah, let's take an highlighter. So most common finding in bomb blast, in a survivor of a bomb blast, is rupture of tympanic membrane. A repeated question. So rupture of tympanic membrane is the most common finding in a survivor of blast injury. Next, again a repeated question. Most common organ severely damaged on the land. On land is the lung, which is specifically called as blast lung. Okay. In water, the most common organ involved underwater in a blast injury is GIT. So on the land it is lung, in the water it is GIT. Okay. Then secondary blast injuries. Now secondary blast injuries, see, whenever there is a blast or an explosion, the things around this blast, they get shattered into pieces, like a log of wood, some metal, some glass pieces, some stone, a big boulder. So these get shattered into pieces. So pieces of this metal, wood, or a stone, they act like a missile. So they fly and they act as a missile, and these missiles, they cause injuries to the body. Okay, those are called as secondary blast injuries. So it's a combination of abrasions, contusions, and lacerations. Lacerations are specifically known as here punctate laceration. So secondary blast injury produces missiles which produce a triad of abrasion, contusion, and punctate laceration. This is called as Marshall's triad. Repeated question again. So Marshall's triad is caused by the missiles in the explosion, due to explosion. Okay, secondary blast injury. Tertiary blast injury, they are caused when the person himself is thrown into air. See, in primary blast injury, the waves, the blast waves are absorbed by the body. They're absorbed by the body. Whereas in tertiary blast injury, So they're not observed because of the force of the blast. The person is thrown away. You would have seen that in the movies. The person is thrown against a ceiling, thrown against a wall. So injuries caused when a person is thrown in the air is tertiary blast injury. Okay. So now going back to the question. So what will be the answer for this? I'll take a pointer here. Okay. So what is the answer for this here? I need to go for the pen. So just a minute. Yeah. So here it is. So these are basically Marshall's triad. It is basically Marshall triad, isn't it? So operations and contusion. This is caused by flying missiles or secondary blast injury. Secondary blast injury. Okay, this is the answer. Let's move to the next question now. A person comes to OPD with an injury to the right thigh. Okay, on examination, a sordid. Well, certain students did say there was a word sordid, but some didn't mention that. So I've used the question mark over here. So a sordid burn injury is noted with erythema, blisters, and a line of demarcation which extends down onto the limb. So important point. It's a sordid injury. It's a sordid burn injury. Okay, which is surrounded by erythema. There is a blister and there is a line of demarcation which extends down, which tickles down, which extends down onto the limb. So obviously the most common cause is, so this should clearly say it is moist burn, which we call as scald. Scald. So these are scalds. Scalds. Well, let's go to the theoretical part of this. Yes. So the scalds are, so these are the injuries which are produced by a hot liquid more than 60 degrees. See, the important point you got to note down here is they have given erythema, blisters, demarcation. What's not given? What's not given? The not given thing is destruction of skin. Destruction of skin has not happened. Then darkening or blackening of skin. Blackening of skin is not given, or singeing of hair. Singeing of hair is not given. Okay, so not given are these which are seen in case of dry burns. Okay, so scars are injuries which are produced by any hot liquid more than 60 or even the steam. Water more than 70 degrees produces full thickness scald in just 1 second. This was also a question. More than 70 just in 1 second. At the site of contact, skin is red. As you can see in these photographs, yes, the skin is red. So you can see very clearly here the blisters. So blisters here. So the skin is red. There is formation. The skin is red. A blister is surrounded by hyperemic skin. The blisters rupture, leaving behind a red surface. So in scars, there is no singeing of hair. Just now I mentioned there is no blackening of the skin. Okay, and injuries are limited to the area or the site of contact. That is, there is demarcation. So there is demarcation, clear demarcation. They are limited to that area. Now, due to gravity, this hot fluid tickles down, just flows down. So wherever it flows down, there will be the lesions or the injury. Okay, so these are scald injury definitely. So there is erythema, there is blister which is surrounded by erythema. Okay, and there is clear demarcation. No singeing, no blackening, no destruction. Okay, now let's move to the next question here. A person working in dye industry presented with nausea, vomiting, dark bloody stools, conjunctivitis, some mention, some doesn't mention, burning pain in the mouth or throat and in the abdomen, most likely poison. Split the question. So first of all, the person is working in a dye industry. So this word itself should almost help us in deciding the answer here. Okay, presented with nausea, vomiting, which is seen with all the poisons, not at all a specific one, absolutely vague. Okay, so dark bloody stools. This is again a clinching point. Dark and bloody stools. Conjunctivitis. It can be seen by many, but not very specific for this. Burning pain in mouth and throat. So dark bloody stools mixed with burning pain in mouth and throat. Now let's go to the theoretical part of it. Okay, so this is nothing but acute arsenic poisoning which resembles cholera. Acute arsenic poisoning. It is acute arsenic poisoning. Dye. The word dye industry should have clinched what I can say the answer here. Okay. So difference between, I mean, this itself is a question. The very first question is this: acute arsenic poisoning resembles cholera. Frequently asked question for us. Then, so what are the differences? So vomiting. Just a minute. Yeah. So vomiting in case of acute arsenic. So first is vomiting, which is followed by diarrhea. Whereas in cholera, it is diarrhea first, which is followed by vomiting. Then second criteria, vomitus. Vomitus in arsenic contains blood and mucus. Vomitus contains blood and mucus. Cholera, it's water. Then third, purging or diarrhea. So purging is after vomiting in case of arsenic. It is before vomiting in case of cholera. Stools. So this is important. So stools are dark, which contain blood and mucus. So initially it's a dark bloody stool with mucus, and later it becomes rice watery. Whereas in cholera, no blood, no mucus, only rice water stools. Only rice water stools. That's important. Tenesmus and nasal irritation are seen in arsenic, not seen in cholera. Okay, fine. The next point here is in acute arsenic poisoning. Yes, so acute arsenic poisoning, theoretically, what all the important points to be known? If at all they would have used that word garlicky odor, again that would have been a clinching diagnostic point. So garlicky odor, see arsenic and phosphorus both have garlicky odor. Okay, arsenic and phosphorus both have garlicky odor. Phosphorus is definitely, I mean, as far as I know, it was definitely not an option here. Okay, so garlicky odor, sweetish but metallic taste. Sweetish but metallic taste. Nausea vomiting is just very big one. So burning pain in the throat and abdomen, conjunctivitis and painful micturition. So acute features, garlicky odor, metallic taste, burning sensation in throat, mouth and abdomen, conjunctivitis, painful micturition. Okay. So the next point here is thallium, which was one of the option for us. Thallium is one of the option for us. Okay. So this is the triad of thallium. Remember this because it is a repeated question again. So thallium triad, alopecia, painful peripheral neuropathy and skin lesions. Okay. So alopecia, painful peripheral neuropathy and skin lesions, APS or SAP, you can remember it as. So thallium triad, alopecia, skin rashes and peripheral neuropathy, painful peripheral neuropathy. Metal fume fever is again asked as a question repeatedly, also referred as Monday morning fever. Monday morning fever. So it is due to inhalation of metallic fumes of zinc. Mainly, it is due to inhalation of metallic fumes of zinc. Also, that of copper and lead. Presents with influenza-like syndrome, fever, chills, myalgia, headache. Okay, morning, I mean Monday morning fever. Also, let's discuss about potassium permanganate. That was also one of the option for you, right? So, what are the features that you see in KMNO4? Burning pain in the mouth, throat, stomach, it remains the same, both in arsenic and phosphor. I mean, arsenic and KMNO4, both are same. Burning pain in the mouth, nose, I mean, mouth, throat, and stomach. But the clinching point here is in KMNO4, the lips, gums, teeth, and tongue, they are discolored. So the lips, teeth, tongue, gums, they are discolored. Which coloration? Initially they are purple, then they turn into dark brown, and finally jet black or coal black. So purple, dark brown, and after some time complete dark or black discoloration. So this would have been a clinching point towards KMNO4, whereas this is definitely arsenic. Okay. Well, a few other points which I wanted to say regarding arsenic. I'll take the help of take note here. So arsenic, quite important for us. See, whenever we are talking about heavy metal poisons, we are rather interested in its chronic toxicity rather than acute toxicity. Okay, so let's discuss about that. The important features of chronic arsenic poisoning. Raindrop pigmentation. I'll not explain what are they. So okay, I'll just very fast I'll revise them. Raindrop pigmentation, hyperkeratosis, hyperkeratosis of palm and sole, extreme thickening of the skin of palm and sole, hyperkeratosis. Then Aldrich-Mees lines, Aldrich-Mees lines. So these are seen on all the 10 fingernails, Aldrich-Mees lines. Blackfoot disease, and then peripheral neuropathy. Okay, peripheral neuropathy, particularly sensory, in predominantly sensory. Okay, Fine. Next, the tests for arsenic. Again, repeated question for us. Test for arsenic. Marsh test, Marsh, then range, Marsh, range. But the best is said to be spectroscopy. The best is said to be spectroscopy. Okay, best is spectroscopy. Well, next, the treatment for arsenic. The treatment for arsenic. Well, BAL is the treatment of choice. BAL is the treatment of choice. But if succimer is one of the option, then best go for succimers. You have to go for succimers. Okay. Then postmortem findings. Postmortem findings. Red velvety stomach. Red velvety stomach. Okay. Red velvety stomach and subendocardial hemorrhages. Red velvety stomach, subendocardial hemorrhages. Subendocardial hemorrhages. Okay. So these are the important points regarding arsenic. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Two friends had alcohol. So after having alcohol, they fought for a common girlfriend. Interesting. Well, one of them pushes the other onto the floor, covers his face, or some say covers his nose, thereby preventing him from breathing while sitting on him or on his chest. This is known as. Okay. Now, fine. So the first sentence, it doesn't carry much meaning for choosing the answer for us, but it ends in a tragic one. So one pushes the other onto the floor, covers his face or the nose, preventing him from breathing. So external, what you can say, orifices of respiration. So the nose, or if he covers the face, the nose and the mouth, so the breathing is prevented. What is that called as? So this part is definitely called as smothering, right? So external orifices of respiration are closed. Okay, smothering while sitting on him or on his chest. So sitting on him or his chest makes the chest mechanical. So there might be fracture of multiple ribs. So the entire chest becomes mechanical. So thereby the lungs cannot expand. There is absolutely no scope for examination, which is called as traumatic asphyxia. So both are happening here. So there is smothering and there is traumatic asphyxia. Both very clearly it is seen. So combination of smothering and traumatic asphyxia is what we call as working, right? So very a good story goes behind that, right? William Burke and William Hare. The person who was finally convicted was William Burke, and so the name goes by him. William Burke and William Hare, right? So they used to supply the dead bodies for anatomical dissection. So how what is the modus operandi that they used to do? Or is so get a beggar, usually the wanderer or a beggar, make him drink a lot, after which one of them used to sit on the chest and the other used to hold on to his hands or onto his legs and drag the person around. So one of the person used to sit on the chest and close his mouth and the nose, and another one used to drag around. Okay, so smothering and combination of smothering and traumatic asphyxia is working, right? So again, what is traumatic asphyxia? As we can discuss here, it's a form of asphyxia in which entry of air into the lungs is prevented by mechanical fixation. That is what just we discussed. Mechanical. I'll just take a highlighter. That would be better. Yeah. So mechanical fixation of the chest, right? And respiratory arrest failure due to mechanical fixation. Done. So then what is smothering? So smothering is a form of asphyxia in which entry of air into the lungs is prevented by closure of external respiratory orifices, either by hand or very soft object like a pillow. Next. So the combination of these two is what is called as burking. So burking is a combination of smothering and traumatic asphyxia. Again, directly from the notes. Okay, fine. So what is overlying? Which was one of the option. Which was one of the option here. See, burking. See, traumatic. I just take a pen here. Yeah. See, traumatic asphyxia is almost always accidental. Okay. Wall collapse would be best example. A stampede or wall collapse, almost always accidental. Smothering, almost always homicidal. almost always homicidal. Accidental do happen, but rare. Okay. So barking, combination of these two, obviously, this shows the manner of death is definitely homicidal. Okay. Overlying. So it's a form of asphyxia in which entry of air into the lungs is prevented by mechanical fixation again of chest wall, preventing from normal movements. Always accidental. More commonly, let's say when a mother just the rolls upon the infant, rolls against an infant. Okay, it's referred as overlaying, which is always accidental. Okay, all these are very important points for us. So let's move to the next question. Which of the following are related to loss of insanity? Loss of insanity. Fine. So let's again, before I come to the question, let's look into the theoretical part of it. Again, directly from the notes. So five laws of insanity. There are many, of course. There are many, of course, but the five, at least, which you should be memorizing or you should have in the back of your mind. One, obviously, Magnoton rule. This is not in the back of your mind. You should always have it in front of your mind. Magnoton's rule in India, which is under section 84 of IPC. Okay. So it says nothing is an offense done by a person who at the time of doing it, by the reason of unsoundness of mind, is unable to understand the nature and consequences of the act which he is doing, or what that he is doing is wrong or contrary to the law. So this is also called as right or wrong test. It's also a question for us. Magnoton's rule is also referred as under 84 IPC right and wrong test. Other tests for insanity: Durham's rule, Curran's rule, irresistible impulse test. These three are no longer used. They are obsolete. Okay. So now presently used one is more commonly used one is American Law Institute test, ALI. American most commonly followed in US. So most commonly followed in US. The rules laid down by American Law Institute test is the one are the ones which are used for diagnosing insanity. Magnoton under 84 IPC, right or wrong rule. ALI, American Law Institute, still in vogue, still used. The three other which are obsolete now: Durham's, Currents, and impulse test or irresistible impulse test. Okay. Well, going back few things now. See, I'll take a pen. Fine. So whether it was Ash-based rule or Ashley's rule, I'm very not very sure. Some say it is Ash-based, some say it is Ashley's. Okay. Well, Ash-based doesn't has got nothing to do with forensic medicine. Okay, it has got nothing to do with forensic medicine. You can Google it if you want. What is that? Okay, Ash-based and Murphy's. Okay, so these both are not related to forensic. You can Google them. What are they? Interesting. You can Google them. Okay. So the answer is a combination of Durham's and Currents. So A plus C, whichever is the option which says A plus C is definitely the answer for us. Okay. Now, if at all it is Ashley's, if at all it is Ashley's, then what does it deals with? See, it deals with determination of sex by sternum bone. Determination of sex determination by the sternum. It has 2 points to say. One is definitely Ashley's, and second point, some textbooks attribute that to Ashley's, some don't. So the one which it is always attributed to Ashley's rule is the length of the sternum. See, the length of sternum in males, it is greater than 149 millimeters. The overall length of the sternum in males more than 149, in females less than 149 millimeters. Okay, this is one point of the Ashley's rule. The second point, which some textbooks attribute, not everything, is see the length of in case of males, the length of body of the sternum is more than twice the length of manubrium. I'll come again. Length of body of the sternum is more than twice the length of manubrium in case of males. And in case of females, length of body is less than twice the length of manubrium. Okay, fine. So these are the important points with that particular question you need to know. Let's move to the next one. Match the following in relation to the fingerprint changes. I'm really a bit astonished. Was this actually the question? Some students have told this. Well, definitely a difficult one. We didn't expect someone to go to this great extent. Sometimes, what you can say, the examiners exhibit the ignorance, I would say, because there are two questions from asphyxia. right? There are two questions from asphyxia. Yes, none of the question, practically speaking, see, the questions should be oriented towards practicality or towards the clinical side is what we always say. Where are the questions from medical law and ethics? So much so, every medical practitioner should know about medical law and ethics, consent, each and everything. What are the important things how a medical practitioner can save himself? No questions from that. Practically, ballistics, no questions from that. Number of sections of IPC, CRPC, and Indian Evidence Act, nothing. No images. I'm a bit astonished the way the questions were set. Fine. Now coming to this question. Ridge trophy, yes. See, in this, what I've done is I've not gone into the exact question. I've directly given you the answers. Okay, I've directly given you the answers. So these are the same answers. So these fingerprint changes are seen in the same conditions. Okay, so ridge atrophy is seen with dermatitis. Distance between the ridges is altered, but the pattern is retained. Distance is altered, pattern is retained, acromegaly. Permanent loss of fingerprint, this is the one which you have to definitely remember. I'll come to that theory part. Radiation injuries. Only ridge alteration, scleroderma. Loss of pattern with ridge atrophy, celiac disease. Okay. Now coming to the theoretical part of it. Again, I've directly taken from the notes here. So if you can remember these points, I think it is sufficiently enough to answer any such questions. Okay. So mutilation of fingerprints, permanent impairment of entire fingerprint pattern is seen in only three conditions: leprosy, electrocution, radiation. For complete loss of fingerprint. Then ridge atrophy is seen, only ridge atrophy or ridge atrophy is seen in celiac disease. Okay. Well, here it says loss of pattern with ridge atrophy. But textbook say ridge atrophy is seen in celiac disease. Ridge alteration is seen in acanthosis nigricans, scleroderma, and eczema. As far as I'm seeing the question since almost 15, 16 years. If you remember this much, it is more than sufficient to answer any mutilation with respect to the fingerprints. Okay. Now, coming to fingerprints, some of the key points you should remember in addition to what has been discussed here is, sorry, yeah, regarding fingerprint, what are the different names? Dactylography, dermatoglyphics, Henry Galton system of identification. Dactylography, dermatoglyphics, Henry Galton system of identification. Okay, then the word adermatoglyphia, that is inability to produce fingerprints on any surface. Inability to produce fingerprints on any surface, a dermatoglyphia. Then finder. Finder refers to, frequent question, fingerprint reader. Okay, FIN fingerprint, DER refers to reader, fingerprint reader. The next point, when you are comparing the two fingerprints, 10 to 12 points of comparison is sufficient for positive identity. 10 to 12 points of comparison are sufficient for positive identity. Okay, and very important, fingerprint is the best method of identification, better than even DNA analysis. Fingerprint is the best method, even better than DNA analysis. Okay, so some of the very important point. And lastly, yes, poroscopy. Poroscopy is also referred as Locard's method of identification. Poroscopy, which is very important when there are partial prints. Poroscopy is very important when there are partial prints. Okay, so some of the important points one should know regarding fingerprints. So let's go back to the question. So after this, let's move to the next question. A pelvic bone was brought by police for analysis. Which of the following confirms it is a male pelvis? Well, I hope some 6 to 7 different features were given. 6 to 7 different features were given, and you were asked to choose which among these features will help us to decide which that the bone belongs to male sex, right? So I'm not going into those features, rather have given you the entire summary of what all the important features of a male pelvic bone. Okay, male pelvic bone, directly again from the notes. Yes, so what are the criteria? Let's look into the criteria. So greater sciatic nerve. See, I always keep saying this to my students. When it comes to pelvis, two clinching points which say unequivocally, absolutely sure that it belongs to male are 2 points: subpubic angle and greater sciatic notch. Rest of all are comparatively subjective. Okay, so greater sciatic notch. In case of male, it is small, deep, and narrow, something like this. Small, deep, and narrow. In females, it is large, wide, and shallow. So small, deep and narrow, large, wide and shallow, very frequently asked. Subpubic angle, inverted V shaped in males and acute, inverted U and it is obtuse. Then preauricular sulcus. This is sulcus by the side of the articulation of what you can say uh, ilium with that of the sacrum. Okay. So not frequently found in males. It is frequently seen and predominantly visible in case of females. Okay. Next, parturition pits, as the name itself indicates, where are they found? Parturition pits. They are seen on the posterior surface of the pubis. On the posterior surface of the pubis, due to parturition, due to the pressure of the parturition. So in males, obviously no pits. In females, they are seen in females who have given birth to the kids. Okay, fine. Next, what are the other points? The fifth one, obturator foramen. In males, large and oval. Females, small and triangular. Ischial tuberosity. Males it is inverted, females it is everted. Now, of course, sacrum, which also forms the part of the pelvis. So long, narrow, and uniformly curved in males. It is long, narrow, and uniformly curved in males, whereas in females, it is short, broad, and it is somewhat like this. The upper half or upper two-third is straight, and then it suddenly takes a turn. Whereas in males, it is uniformly curved like this. In females, there is a sudden turn like this. Okay. So these are the important points of difference between male and female pelvic bone. And in fact, another point you got to note here. See, as per Krogman's accuracy of sexing, as per Krogman's accuracy of sexing, pelvis is attributed 95%. Repeated question, 95%. And as a single bone, this is the one which has highest percentage of accuracy. Pelvic bone is the one which has highest percentage of accuracy in deciding whether it belongs to male or a female. That's what is called as Krogman's accuracy. 95% is attributed to the pelvis. Okay. And the other point here is Todd's method. Todd's method. Okay. So what this is the best method to determine the age after 25 years. Of course, only in the dead person, not in the living. Why? I'll tell you that. See, Todd's method is the best method to determine the age after 25 years. How? So this is done by determining or noting the changes in the symphyseal surface of the pubis. See, this is the pubic bone. The two hip bones meet at symphysis pubis, right? So symphysis pubis is cut open and the symphyseal surface is studied to determine Todd's method. Obviously done only in the dead or when the mutilated remains are available. So in addition to this, Krogman's and Todd's method is what you need to know. Okay, so pelvis is the best bone to determine the age after 25 years, which is done by Todd's method, not Gustafson's, not by the fusion of the skull suture. It is Todd's method. Right. Well, the next question: which of the following is a feature of Korsakoff psychosis? Korsakoff psychosis. Okay. Well, in fact, very practically speaking, not a great difference between Korsakoff's and Wernicke's, isn't it? So, which of the following is a feature? Ataxia, confusion, amnesia, peripheral neuropathy. Right? Let's look into the theory then. So, Wernicke's encephalopathy, first let's look into that, because if untreated, the same goes to Korsakoff, isn't it? Right. First is Wernicke's encephalopathy, definitely seen due to vitamin B12 deficiency, vitamin B1 deficiency. Yeah, it is seen through the deficiency of thiamine, vitamin B1. There are many reasons for thiamine deficiency. One of them is definitely chronic alcoholism. Chronic alcoholism is one of the important reason for deficiency. So what are the features? Encephalopathy, particularly resulting in short-term memory loss, oculomotor disturbances, ataxia, and peripheral neuropathy. So peripheral neuropathy, they say it's a feature of Wernicke's rather than Korsakoff's. Okay. Then, if the same Wernicke's, if untreated with B1, vitamin B1, it progresses into Korsakoff psychosis, right? So, what are the features of Korsakoff psychosis? Amnesia, both anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Confabulation. What's confabulation? See, confabulation, It's a condition wherein, see, while narrating certain incident, so how do we narrate any incident? We narrate with the help of our memory, right? So we memorize what has happened, what did happen, and we narrate a particular incident. So these are the group of people with Korsakoff psychosis, wherein so there is some missing memory. So while narrating a particular incident, certain gaps in the memory are there, and that gap in memory they fill it with their own cooked up stories. So the flow of that memory will not happen. There is no flow in that memory. There is a gap in the memory. And in order to fill that gap, they use their own cooked up stories. So that is called as confabulation. It's a feature of Korsakoff. And polyneuropathy, rather than peripheral, it's polyneuropathy. Okay. So Korsakoff, amnesia, this is easily remembered by ACP, mnemonic, Assistant Commissioner of Police, or ACP. Amnesia, confabulation, and polyneuropathy. Encephalopathy, it is both, encephalopathy, oculomotor disturbance, ataxia, and peripheral neuropathy. Okay, Korsakoff psychosis. Next, which of the following best describes the mechanism of action of organophosphorus in inhibition of acetylcholinesterase? Okay, so inhibition of, I'll take a pen. Yeah, OP in inhibition of acetylcholinesterase. So competitive inhibition, irreversible, yes, irreversible competitive inhibition. It is irreversible because of which it becomes a poison, isn't it? It's not a irreversible. It is irreversible competitive inhibition would be the best answer among here. Okay. See, it inhibits both uh, true and pseudocholinesterase, right? Now, the points to be known is true cholinesterase or RBC cholinesterase or acetylcholinesterase, one and the same. True or RBC or acetylcholinesterase is the most specific in determining the amount of poisoning. The extent of poisoning is most specifically determined by true cholinesterase. So true or acetylcholinesterase is the most specific indicator of OP poisoning. Pseudocholinesterase, which is also plasma, isn't it? Pseudo is also plasma cholinesterase, which is basically butyryl cholinesterase. This is most sensitive. These two words are a bit different. Most sensitive because it falls most rapidly, but it falls not only due to OP, it falls because of many other reasons, renal lesions or the hepatic lesions. So you cannot take that as specific for OP. Most specific indicator of OP poisoning, true. Most sensitive for OP poisoning, pseudocholinesterase. Okay. So these are the important points that you got to know, important questions. Wishing you all the very best for the coming exams.